We're in our, I guess, our third session. In our first two sessions were well received, but I did get a few suggestions about topics that I had missed. And then Emil had a specific request, which I'm going to mention at the beginning, and then we're going to go through the individual topics, and maybe you can keep his request in mind as you respond to the individual topics, and at the end, if you have more to add on it, you can. His specific request was he was looking to have something from you that you would think would be appropriate for his kids. That is, any kind of advice. Now, keeping in mind they're going to be born into a world different from what we know about, so some of it has to be timeless-oriented advice. I guess it would be, human relations type stuff or whatever. But anyway, whatever you think, based on your experience, what wisdom you would want to pass on to your great-grandchildren. And I guess Emil might take some of the advice also. He's young enough, right? So that's basically what his request was.
Okay, the first requirement of parents is to teach their children how to survive in the real world. That's the basic premise.
Which can vary based on your circumstances. If you're in Paleolithic times, you're going to know how to...
There are lots of variables, but the bottom line is they've got to learn to live in the world and survive with as much comfort as they can.
And how would you rate your success in that regard? I guess both your kids are still alive, so the prima facie evidence would be positive.
Quite successful, luckily. You win some, you lose some.
All right. Okay, well, let's keep that in mind, and then let's talk about some of these specific questions that I've missed. The first question, somebody asked me about, we did talk about your shooting experience and how you got into shooting really in the Army, and then after that became a competitive target pistol and rifle shooter, mostly pistols, I guess. And how experienced, your experience making your own bullets and so on and so forth. One topic we did not discuss, though, is that we talked about how you got the right to carry a gun, a pistol, in New York City, which is relatively unusual because the rules are pretty strict, and you were able to do that because of being involved in the fur business. But we didn't talk about your experiences with that carrying. That is to say, were you ever in a situation where you actually where it helped you that you had a gun?
Couple of times.
Okay, well, let's hear about those.
Well, I was shylocking a non-union fur finisher, and I stopped by to pick up some money from him, and when I walked out of his loft, he was a non-union finishing. The finisher is the one who put the lining in a fur coat, and the union didn't like it because his prices were less than the union people charged, because he didn't have the expenses of supporting the union. And when I walked out of his loft, I got slammed against the wall. When I bounced off the wall, I had the .38 in my hand with the hammer back, and there were 4 Union thugs with lead pipes and brass knuckles looking at me, with their hands in the air. And my statement was quite brief. I'm carrying a payroll, and you look like hold-up men to me. And he said, oh, no, we're Union men. Bullshit. I'm carrying a payroll and you're trying to hold me up. And they were standing there with their hands in the air, doing absolutely nothing. And I didn't have to shoot anybody, which was good.
So they wandered off?
They backed off very carefully.
Ah, good. All right. So that was one time.
Sometimes I prefer not to bring it up.
Oh, all right. Fair enough. Okay. What about the many uses of plastic, wood, and Gorilla Glue? I think that the questioner is actually interested in when would you use plastic, wood, And when would you use Gorilla Glue? What would be the decision, the criteria you would use to decide which one to use in a given circumstance?
Gorilla Glue is more permanent than plastic wood. Plastic wood won't weather well. Where when Gorilla Glue dries, it's waterproof. So for a permanent repair, you want to use Gorilla Glue.
Well, when would you ever use plastic wood?
To fill holes in indoors, especially. A hole in the floor, a hole in a missing piece of furniture. You can smooth it down, sand it, and stain it so it makes a pretty good repair. But it doesn't weather well outside.
So basically, if you're doing anything outside, you prefer Gorilla Glue to plastic wood.
Wherever possible, yes. In fact, you can mix sawdust with Gorilla Glue and get a pretty good plastic wood that's far superior to the plastic wood you can buy in a can.
Now, I do remember one time you using plastic wood outside, and this was probably before Gorilla Glue was even invented, because I was a kid, and in our house in Terrytown, which you and Edie had built, there was, in the back, there was, the second floor had a slight overhang over the first floor, and as a consequence, there was kind of like a roof over the outside. You could get in under the underhang and not get hit by rain, for example, because this part of the second floor protruded out over the first floor. And for some reason, I don't know why, there was a little wood trim along the edge of that overhang. I guess it was redwood, which matched the redwood that was on the front of the house. And for some reason, bumblebees seem to love to bore holes in that little trim at the edge of the overhang and build their little nests there. Bumblebees, of course, do not live in colonies. They live individually. They're unusual bees in a lot of respects. And that's one of them. And so every summer we would have a couple, maybe, of bumblebees that would make a new hole and bore a hole in that little overhang thing and live there. And I guess they would, I don't know what they do, lay eggs or store honey. I don't know what a single bumblebee does, to be honest. But whatever they did it in our house. And after this was going on for a couple of years, you kind of got annoyed, and you decided you were going to fix the problem. And what you did was you basically waited until the bumblebee went into its hole, and then you would get up on a ladder and fill it in with plastic wood, so the bumblebee would get entombed inside the house and presumably, not be boring any more holes in our house. So I don't know if you remember that.
No, but it sounds like a good solution.
All right.
Actually, bumblebees do a good job of fertilizing plants and flowers, since the honeybees have diminished somewhat.
Right. We're definitely taking very good care of our bumblebees right now. This is going back 30 or 40 years, probably 40 or 50 years. Okay. Another question was the proper way to mix cement. Now, you had a lot of experience with cement when I was a kid also, because in that same house that we just were talking about, when we moved in, there was nothing but dirt in the back, and you actually built a terrace of slate and cement, and you mixed the cement, you bought the slate, mixed the cement, and laid the slate all, and I believe you did almost the whole job yourself.
Pretty much.
You had a little cement mixer that was like an electric cement mixer, if I remember correctly, that would actually do the mixing. And I remember going with you to the hardware store and buying huge bags of cement, and I think of lime also. Is that right?
Lime would make a mortar.
Okay. So maybe you can walk us through how you create the proper kind of cement for something you're building outside.
Well, it depends on whether you want cement or whether you want mortar. They're two different things. Mortar is stickier.
Well, what did you use to build that terrace?
Plain cement.
Okay. And then I think there was a stone edge to the cement where you kind of, maybe they used mortar for that. I'm not really sure.
No, you could use regular cement. There would be no reason to use mortar on that.
Okay.
It was pretty much straight cement.
All right. So walk us through the process of creating the cement.
Oh, you get a bag of cement and go by the shovelful. 3 to 1 is a good mixture.
Now, for those who don't know, when you buy cement in a bag, it's actually powder.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can buy it ready mixed with sand too, but it's less expensive to mix it together.
Right. So that's right. You would mix. So you'd put sand and cement in the mixer, in the
Yeah,
electric mixer.
roughly 3 to 1.
That's 3 cement to sand.
No, 3 sands to one
3 sands to
cement.
cement. Okay. And then what happens?
You mix it with water until you get a good, thick, heavy paste, and then you let it dry and keep it wet. That's the secret of cement. You got to cure it.
So that what we mean by curing is after you've actually put the cement in and cemented your slate slabs together, then you're not finished. You need to spend several days alternately allowing it to dry and watering again, right?
Well, if you cover it with plastic, you can water it underneath the plastic and spray it a couple of hours after it's dried down. You just don't want to spray it till it's set because you wash the cement away.
So you have to be careful not to actually direct the stream of water at the cement that's not completely.
Water very gently until it dries so that you can spray it with water without diluting the cement.
So how many times do you have to do that?
You keep it wet for a couple of days. The longer you cure it, the stronger it will be.
And how long did it take you to build that terrace? It was a pretty big terrace.
It was a very large terrace. And getting the slate was the big job.
Oh yeah, where did you do that from?
Mostly bought a load of cement and hauled it down in wheelbarrow.
Well, the cement, yeah, but the slate, where did you get the
Slate
slate from?
I bought slate too.
Did you get it all from one place?
Yeah, you get it from a lumber yard. They'd sell slate.
Okay, well, I do remember that job.
I think I stole some slate too.
Yeah, that sounds like you. All right, building fires. What's the best type of kindling and firewood?
Oak is the best firewood. Ash is pretty good. Apple is great firewood. The fruit trees are hardwood. Hardwood's the best firewood.
Does it make any difference whether it's an inside fire in a fireplace or an outside fire?
No, you want hardwood for either one if you can get it. You don't want to use pine inside because you'll end up having to clean your chimney quite frequently. Either that or risk a chimney fire.
Right. In fact, we had a chimney fire,
Yeah.
right?
Flame went up about 40 feet in the air.
I don't remember seeing that, but I do remember the event. I must have been about 7 or 8. This was again in the house in Terrytown, and it was pretty exciting. We had fire trucks up there, and I guess we'd been in the house maybe 4 or 5 years by that time. Enough time for the tar to have built up in the fireplace, in the chimney.
Yeah, I used to burn a lot of wood. I like to look at the fire.
So how did you find out that there was a fire in the chimney?
It roars.
Ah, so it made a noise.
It's like a express train.
Right. So then you went outside and looked up and saw the fire coming
I
out?
didn't have to go outside. I knew what it was, and the way to handle a chimney fire is close the doors to your fireplace.
So you don't get air going in.
Yeah, once you cut the air off, the fire will die out.
But this was before we had doors on the fireplace.
Yeah,
so I
in that
remember.
case, you couldn't do anything but call the fire department.
Right. So what did they do?
Well, they put a hose fire down or foam. I don't remember what they did.
Ah, I see.
But they were pros. They knew what to do.
Right. And it was easy in our case because our roof was flat, so it was very easy for them
Yeah,
to
they could walk
walk
up.
up. Right.
Actually, you could have put a hunk of slate over the thing and cut the air off, too, at the top.
Right, because the hot air would all go up and then get stuck at the top, and there's no way you're out
Yeah,
of it. So
then, yeah,
eventually
that
it would suffocate itself.
it's the draft that makes the inferno, but once you cut the draft down, your fire will die out.
So that was the end of using softwood in the fireplace, I guess.
Well, no, hardwood will cause a chimney fire, too. It just takes a lot longer.
Right. Okay, let's see, what else do we have here? How to make a great cup of coffee.
Trial and terror. I just know how much water to put in, how much coffee to put in. I like my coffee strong, and it works.
Do you ever use instant coffee?
Uh, Very seldom. I don't like the taste of it.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. That's a
It's
practice.
better than no coffee. Let me put it that way.
That's a practice that's a total mystery to me. I've always loved the smell of coffee, but never liked the taste. It tastes bitter, and just that's no appeal to me.
Pronounce it better, and you'll enjoy it more.
You think? Maybe so. Okay, your views on recycling.
I think it's a good practice.
Now, when I was a kid, I remember composting. You would compost stuff. You built a gigantic chicken wire enclosure for piling leaves up, and of course we got millions of leaves because there was a woods behind us, and then there were the leaves that fell on the lawn, which I always had to rake and schlep over to the. Usually, well, for the first few years, I was schlepping them over to the woods and just dropping them in. But then you built this enclosure, and we had to carry them further to get it to the enclosure and pile them up inside the enclosure. And that, what does that do when you have a big penned up enclosure of leaves? What does that get you?
Well, it gets you topsoil after about 3 years.
Ah,
If you remember to water it, you got to hose it down.
well, it's outside. It rains on it. Isn't that
Well, you can't count on it raining all the time.
well, that's true.
It takes a lot of water to compost.
So did you get decent topsoil from your compost?
Yeah, that's what made the garden grow.
Well, that's good to know. I'm glad to hear that there was some payoff. I think you were asking me about my tetanus shot and my stepping on nails, and I believe it was a run to the composting pile with a load of leaves that I stepped on that nail that I ended up having to get a tetanus shot for. So I'm glad you got something out of it because it was a pain for me. Okay, what else do we have? Oh, talk about the evolution of ski bindings. That's right. When you first started skiing, how did you basically had like planed off slabs of wood were the skis that you used, right? Were there even edges on it?
Yeah, there were edges that were screwed into the wood.
Screwed into the wood.
Tiny screws which would last one day if you were lucky.
So you were constantly rescrewing your edges
you'd
back on.
spend the night rescrewing the edges, and eventually you'd wear the edges out so they wouldn't hold the screw.
So what kind of binding did those skis have?
The first ones I had were the heels would lift up. They were like cross-country bindings.
Uh-huh.
But you could also hook a cable and keep the heel down. So you had, but they weren't safety bindings.
Right. They didn't release if the ski got caught. So if your ski got caught, you just broke your leg, basically.
Either that or you broke the ski.
Right. Yeah. Whichever broke first.
Yeah. Well, both.
Well, I guess if you broke your leg, you wouldn't have much use for skis for a while. So 6 of one, half dozen of the other. So that was what, in the late 40s after the war?
It was after the war. I didn't ski before the war.
Right. So
I went right from high school into
the army.
The army.
So what was where did you ski? I mean, were there actual commercial ski places, or was it
rope tows mostly, and occasional T-bar?
So they probably didn't go up very high, obviously.
No, they didn't go up high.
Right. So was that in New York, or did you have to go to Vermont to do that?
I usually went to Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I went to Connecticut quite often. You didn't have to travel too far. There weren't any big mountains to get to anyway.
Right, because the technology didn't exist to get the lifts up that high, so nobody was using them. So when did the chairlifts come into play? I mean, they were already there by the time.
First, the rope tows started, and then platypulls or T-bars.
Right.
And then the chairlifts came, single chairlifts.
Now, a platypule was basically more like a J-bar than a T-bar because it was only a one-person thing, if I remember correctly. It was like a little round disc that you sort of sat back on it, right, between your legs. And it gave you a nice stimulating ride. And then were J bars and T bars contemporaneous? I mean, they both existed when I skied, but did they start out? Which came first, the J bar or the T bar?
The J bar and then the T bar.
Right. Yeah. Now
T
J bar was like like a J, or really it was more like an L than a J because it wasn't curved, and so it was perpendicular with one outstretching with one outstretching horizontal piece of wood, usually in those days anyway. I guess later they used plastic, that you would kind of lean back on, and it went under the cheeks of your rear end, and basically you held on to the perpendicular bar with one hand, and it would pull you up. And then the T bar was the same thing, only it had two protruding horizontal pieces on either side of the central perpendicular bar, and it was designed for two people, so two people could go up together. And the T-bar was always a little tricky because the way that it's working, of course, is that your feet are on the ground and your skis are on your feet, and there's kind of like a track, and you have to keep your skis in the track. So it requires a fair amount of attention. It's not like you can't just close your eyes and it happens for you. A rope tow is the same way, of course. Your skis are in a track. So when you're on a T-bar, you're dependent on your partner to some extent, because if your partner screws up, it's going to mess you up too. So anyway, but actually I'm stealing your thunder here. You're supposed to be talking about this stuff. So when did Mount Snow and Bromley and those places in Vermont that actually used the whole mountains first start opening up?
Let's see. I don't know. I think Stowe was the first one to build chairlifts. There were big chairlifts.
And that was a long way away. That was almost to Canada, right?
No, Stowe was up in Vermont.
Well, right, but I mean it was in the northern part of Vermont, as opposed to Mount Snow, which was in the southern part.
Yeah, right. It was, and it was a little higher too.
In terms of elevation.
Yeah.
Right. So, did all your girlfriends have to ski? Was that a prerequisite?
Yeah, either that or I had to teach them, which I hated to do.
Uh-huh. So, which ones were good in terms of being good pupils?
Well, most of them learned, or if they weren't girlfriends.
Well, I guess you were pretty successful with Edie, right? She didn't ski before she met you, did she?
I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, I remember there was skiing in Washington when we went to visit there, but that was decades later.
I don't know whether she skied or not before, but she turned out to be a pretty good skier.
Yep. Yeah. She was definitely, in terms of form, she was better than I was.
Oh yeah, she had a good form.
Right. Okay, let's see what else we have here. So, your views on climate change. Climate change?
I don't think man has that much to do with the climate change. It's been through history. We've had hot and cold spells, dry spells, wet spells. I think it's just part of the earth.
Well, it is certainly the case that the amount of carbon dioxide in the air is increasing.
Yeah, but there were volcanoes throwing carbon dioxide in the air before man was there, so what else is new?
Right. Well, I'm just saying that if increasing the amount of carbon dioxide does result in heating, which theoretically it should by the laws of thermodynamics, and we are increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the air, then presumably we are contributing to some extent to the warming.
It's possible.
Well, I think it's inevitable. The issue, of course, is how much we're contributing.
I think the pollution is more detrimental than the carbon dioxide.
Well, the climate change people consider carbon dioxide pollution.
Well, that's their problem.
Okay, let's see. What else do we have here? What about dogs and cats? Now, you've pretty much always had dogs and cats, right? I mean, when you were a kid, you had dogs and cats.
Yeah.
Was that because of Morris and Toby, or was that because of the kids?
Morris didn't particularly like cats. He liked dogs, but he didn't like cats.
Okay, so he was responsible for there being dogs around.
You're right.
We
like dogs too.
Right. Right. Oh, yeah, I know the kids like dogs. So, how did the cats come about then? Is that a
Uh,
Hilda thing?
I don't know. They got mice. That's why we got them.
So it was a practical consideration
Yeah.
because you were, after all, living on a farm. So your sister, your eldest sister, eventually became a very serious aficionado of cats.
That's true.
How many did she have when she moved?
Well, you throw Martha's cats in, she had about 30 or 32.
Right.
A
That's
hell of a lot of
I
fur.
believe when her sister Martha, or your younger sister, well, your not your youngest sister, but your younger sister, Martha was number three in the pecking
Yeah.
order. When she died in 2000, if I remember correctly, she had 17 cats. Martha, living in her house in Nutley, New Jersey, and Hilda had 21 cats of her own living in her house in Passaic. And that doesn't count the outdoor cats that didn't really belong to anybody. But anyway, the 17 plus 21, she had 38, I think, was the top number. Living in her house, eventually most of them in a room, which was designed for the cats.
She spent almost $30,000 for that room.
Yeah, that was a labor of love for sure.
It had thermopane windows. The floors were sloped so they could drain them with a hose.
And there was a drain in the middle.
And there's drains so you could run it down the drain, which went to the outside. And she had air conditioning and a television set.
Yeah, television set so she could play stuff so the cats wouldn't feel lonely when they were, of course, there were 38 cats, so there were plenty of feline company, but they could have some human company even when the humans weren't there.
Some of the cats you couldn't pet. They were
they were
feral.
like well, maybe not feral, but close, but previously
pretty damn close.
pretty close to feral. Right? Yeah, those were the outside cats, were the feral cats that couldn't be domesticated. She had a whole bunch of help there in Passaic, right?
Health.
Well, help in the cat.
She had Alice did most of the work.
Well, but there was a whole cadre of cat ladies that.
Yeah, but they just brought cats to stick in Hilda's outdoor porch.
Well, that's not completely fair. They did feed a lot of cats that they didn't bring to Hilda's porch, and they also helped find homes for some of the indoor cats.
They did get rid of it, but they brought a lot more in than they.
Yeah, there never seemed to be any lack of them. And then Alice started bringing in animals, not all of which were cats. She had an ocelot at one point, in addition to lots of dogs and various other animals. Okay, but we stray. I think that pretty much covers all of the topics that I was asked to expand on. Okay, here's one that I missed. How and when did you propose marriage to Edie?
Oh, we were dating, and I suddenly decided she was the one and only.
And so,
I asked her to marry me, and she said yes.
was this in a restaurant?
On a date, I don't remember where or how.
You had a ring?
No, not at that time.
So it was kind of an impulse thing?
Yeah, well, no, I planned on it.
Uh-huh.
I knew a good thing when I saw
it. And what do you remember about the day of your wedding, which was October 12th, 1951?
A day that'll go down in infamy.
Where was the wedding?
In Tarrytown, on Whitehall's property.
And this was not too long after Morris had acquired Whitehall, maybe 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, probably.
So it was his first real social event that he was able to use Whitehall for. And where was the wedding exactly on Whitehall?
On the tennis court, I think.
So it was outside?
Outside, yeah.
Okay. And were there a lot of guests?
It must have been 150.
So it was a big deal.
Very big deal.
Okay. And did you guys go on a honeymoon?
Eventually, yeah. I don't think we I don't remember exactly, to be honest.
Ah, all right. I think that I don't remember whether you guys were skiing. Well, of course, I wasn't around. I don't remember learning whether you guys went skiing much before kids or not. I guess you had to because I remember very early on, even before I skied, being taken on trips to go skiing. And I remember that really well because they were very long trips. And in those days, when I was really young, I got car sick, so it was a big deal for me to go on a
Oh,
long car ride. Um, I had to ride in the front. It was the only place I could.
huh.
I didn't throw up, and it wasn't much fun, I guess, being with a kid who was throwing up in a long car ride. So I got to ride in the front quite a bit there for a few years. Um, okay, well, let's get back to Emil's question. Besides your advice for how to treat your kids, is there anything else any other words of wisdom you'd like to pass along to the next generation?
Uh, yeah, a way to get along with some women. Avoid the ones that are insecure because they're trouble. They make good one-night stands or two-night stands, but for a long involvement, you don't want any part of them.
Hmm. Okay, well, that's good advice for the boy descendants. What about some advice for the girl descendants?
Uh, be secure within yourself as a woman.
And you had one girl child, that was Jill.
Yeah,
And do you think she has succeeded in doing that pretty much?
pretty much so. Yeah, she's a good human being.
And I guess Edie was pretty secure.
Very.
Was that true of all your girlfriends?
No, some were insecure, but they made interesting one-night stands or two-night stands, but no future with insecure people.
Hmm.
You can't teach them to be secure. It's got to come from internally.
What about dealing with groups of people? I mean, one of the big problems nowadays with kids is bullying. Did you ever experience any bullying when you were a kid?
I could fight too well.
Ah, so it wasn't an issue for you?
I could punch my way out of it. I decked a few bullies and then they didn't bother me. I had a nasty left hook.
What about the girls, Hilda and Martha and Mickey? Did they have any problems?
I don't know, not that I knew of.
Hmm.
I probably wouldn't have recognized it anyway at that point.
Well, they might have come to you for help,
Well, if they did, I'd help them. That's
right?
what families are for.
Right. Um, okay. Well, any other suggestions that you can think of that future folk can benefit from?
No, I pretty much covered things. Just do the best you can with what you have to work with.
All right. Great. Well, let's wrap it up for now.